We're remembering a few Centennial moments with the former chair of the Department of Radio TV, Charles Rasberry, good friend and mentor to me when I was a student here at Arkansas State. Before the break, we were getting ready to talk about the Indian Sports Network. What part did KASU play in the Indian Sports Network?
Well, it was the flagship, of course, for the Indian Sports Network for many, many years. As a matter of fact, Dr. Ring, I mentioned his vision for the program a few moments ago. Dr. Ring knew that one of the ways we could get our story out was through sports, because everybody likes sports. But the stations in those days in this area were all AM stations. Mm-hmm. And many of them at that time were committed to University of Arkansas sports. And Dr. Ring felt like if we had our own station, we could do our own sports and we could get our word out that way about ASU. And so we did. We started a network. We knew that if we fed the broadcast stations, we could feed it cheaper or less expensively than they could come over here and do it themselves, and it would encourage them to carry the games. And because we had chosen to go with an FM station, we could feed those games directly via FM.
They just pick it up
off the air. Mm-hmm. And now that would sound unusual today, but in those days, there were no FM stations to speak of. All the stations were AM, so it's not quite the same as it would be today. But they picked those games up directly from our FM, ran them through their own equipment, and broadcast the games. And it cost them much less money because we didn't have to have the need for expensive telephone lines. So that encouraged them to carry our games, and we set up a network, and that network grew over the years and became a real success for us.
We've got a picture of one of the old broadcast crews from, I guess, the 60s.
At least.
Sitting up in the press box of old K Stadium.
K Stadium on obviously a cold afternoon.
Day. Yeah.
That's Bob Shumpert, who was one of our engineers at the time. And then I'm to Bob's left, Darrell Cunningham, who was the first instructor that we brought to Arkansas State after I had come here. Mm-hmm. And next to Darrell is DeWitt Waits, who was one of our first play-by-play men. And next to DeWitt is Mike Stropp, who was one of our students in one of our classes and was working the game as part of that.
Well, you said earlier that students were an important part of KASU. They were an important part of the sports network, too.
Absolutely. In fact, in almost every year that I can recall, we had a student from our special events class who was part of the network crew, at least one, and on home games, of course, basketball, football, whatever it was, we had many more involved.
And one of the other nice things about that, and this goes back to Carl Ring's idea to get the message out, is that sometimes those stations would carry those broadcasts sustaining. In other words, they wouldn't sell local advertisements, and the network put announcements about Arkansas State on
Absolutely.
the network.
We put announcements about various departments and the various organizations at Arkansas State. We inserted those announcements during the quote commercial breaks, and because they were non-commercial announcements, radio stations would just run them. They'd just stay right with us, and so we got the word out that way, sure did.
Now, back in 1973, a devastating tornado hit this community, and it was on Memorial Day. And a few weeks later, another storm system moved through, and what did you do?
Well,
got up in the middle of the night?
Right. I remember that because it became apparent from the earlier tornado that nobody was on the air in the middle of the night.
Stations signed off
in those days, right? That's right. They didn't operate 24 hours a day. And I remember very well, as though it were yesterday, waking up early in the morning about 2:30 and realizing we were in the midst of a storm. And I distinctly remember thinking, well, if I'm going to get blown away, I might as well get blown away doing some good. And so I got up and came to the station, and I can still remember the thunder and lightning. Man, it was a night. Signing the station on the air, getting a hold of the National Weather Service in Little Rock, recording some information from them. We were under storm warnings that night, or that morning, and broadcasting that information out to the public. And Rich, you would probably believe it, but many people might not. The response we received was just overwhelming. I mean, the calls started coming in, and you wouldn't think that many people would find a station on the air at 3 o'clock in the morning, but they did.
But they were up, tuning across the dial,
trying to
and
find
they found you.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was really the start of what would become for us a really signature type of broadcast of weather coverage.
Later, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration recognized the efforts of KASU.
That's right. We did receive an award from them, and also we were cited in the Congressional Record. The Board of Trustees here at ASU recognized us. And then because of some later broadcasts, the city of Jonesboro also adopted a resolution thanking and praising KASU, and that was a very memorable time for us. Of course, today the situation is different. Commercial stations operate 24 hours a day, many of them do, and they're all into weather coverage now, but that was not the case in those days.
They kind of took up where we left off.
Hey, I like to think that we
set the standard.
Set the standard. I really do. I really like to think that.
It was interesting. Trey Stafford of Triple FM said to me the other day, "I learned my weather broadcasting from you and Charles."
Yeah. Well, that's a very kind thing for him to say. But a lot of our students have picked up on that and have carried that on to their operations, and it's a real service today, just as it was then.
This Centennial Moment program reviewed the history of Arkansas State University through the memories of Charles Rasberry, former chairman of the Department of Radio TV. I'm Rich Carvell.